Hello, and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duval, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who, if you're thinking backwards, is Grun Omtel.
Longo. Oh, you did the translation on that, huh?
I was just going to go ahead and get that right out there. Well, I already had the chart, so I already had done the work. If I needed to have another use. Actually, I did it multiple times. I had multiple uses for that thing. But yeah, anyway. We are talking about King's Quest I, the Roberta and Ken Williams classic from Sierra, what year did we say this was? 1984? 4, I believe, yeah.
I think.
Yeah, and we have now finished this game, and next week we'll go on to the second that we're kind of packaging together here. But let's dive in. Let's dive into King's Quest.
So you, I'm infinitely impressed by the fact that you didn't use any hints. I guess in retrospect, I'm not surprised. You definitely, you're a text adventure guy, and you're definitely a more logical thinker than I am. I definitely never had the ability to do that back in the old days. And I think I mentioned this last episode.
Well, you were younger.
I was younger, sure, yeah. But the text adventures were out and around the same time. So, but one thing I realized finishing up that I mentioned in the first episode that became even more apparent to me is, which was sort of a weird way to play this game. I have just enough memories of pretty much every puzzle, but in many cases, not quite the full memory. So there were multiple times where I was like, wait, I thought. So it's. I feel like there are times when it might have been an advantage to come in clean, because like for instance, I walked right over as soon as I started the game. Walked right over, got the dagger. I knew exactly where it was. I was okay. Got
right. That I found very late.
Yeah, I suspected that because you didn't even mention the rock before. Yeah. And it's rule breaking, right? Because there's that rock you can push, but then other places you can't.
And that is a rock that is a thing that I think that they did in Wizard and the Princess. I feel like there was a rock you could push in that one too. I can't remember that for sure, but that was my inkling. It was like, this rock just definitely looks different from all the other places in the game. But it is, yes, there's not a consistent physics that work in this game. That is for sure.
Did you? Which side?
But the biggest help actually starting off this time was a couple of things. One was this game leans so heavily into the fairy tale stuff.
Yeah.
And so really just having a week where I knew all the elements because I made the whole map last week. Mm-hmm. And having a whole week of just like, oh, okay, I know there's a goat. And I know there's a troll, and that's okay. That's a thing. There's a witch in a candy house. Oh, okay, that's a thing. I just kind of stuck those things in my brain and let them sort of simmer. And plus, I had the map, which was just helpful at that point. But then the second thing that was really helpful was going and finding the manual that you mentioned, which was far better. Mm-hmm. In terms of explaining what you could expect from the parser. There's some funny stuff that I didn't end up using. I don't think I needed to duck ever, though there's clearly an image of him ducking behind a very specific rock in the world, which I think is kind of funny.
Yeah, I don't.
But it's in the manual, and it's not necessary. And the swimming's not really necessary. That's not true. It is necessary in one location. Mm-hmm. It's just kind of a surprise how much water there is and how
you can swim in any lake, swim across the lakes and stuff if you want to.
Yes, you can. If it will actually help you get somewhere, I guess. So yeah. I didn't find there was one lake I think I crossed that way. But it was more 6 of one, half a dozen of the other in terms of how close I was to where I was trying to get. Mm-hmm. So I think I crossed the Serene Lake that way. But yeah, so and then there was one puzzle that's the most difficult in the game that I felt pretty good about getting. And we'll get to how I got there. That one was the longest kind of poser of just sort of thinking like, what could this, there were clues that I think were enough, but it was a tough puzzle. And that's, of course, the Rumplestiltskin puzzle. So
yeah.
That's pretty brutal. I definitely forgive people for not figuring that out. I was pretty blown away when I did.
Did you figure that out on stream?
I did not stream this week because I had a bit of a bug, and I was not really suitable. I was not camera ready. Also, as I was saying pre-show, this is not a good streaming game. Not because not so much happens in it, not that much happens in it, but more because this sort of game requires. I don't think I could have solved nearly as much of it as I did on stream, just because of the performative nature of streaming and interacting with an audience and things like that. I think if I was recording it alone, like just to put on YouTube or something like that, it would be different because there wouldn't be that interaction. But there would be a lot of dead time of me just sitting here, scratching my head and looking and drawing stuff on my map and just sort of doodling and whatever. But yeah, so if you actually saw the whole time, I mean, it took me hours to finish it. Some of that was building up the right sequence of operations to solve sort of the bigger puzzles, to get the shield and all that stuff. But but it's not. These sorts of games are not great for streaming.
It'd be a funny,
because I think
almost like performance art, or something like that, where it's like, where you're actually streaming, you taking notes in silent, as if nobody's watching you. You know what I mean? And you're just there. It's like a slice of life, like watching somebody inside a house through those street performance arts where, where they have a room surrounded by by not Pyrex. What's the name of that?
The plastic.
Stuff? Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Plexiglass.
Yeah. Voyeurism kind of experiment. But anyway, weird. Yeah. When you push that, I'm just out of curiosity because I'm looking at my notes and I kept track of as many things as I could remember on ways to die in the game, which I think is hilarious. And I know I forgot a few, but did
I did that one. Did you? Pushing the rock from the wrong direction?
I did it too in the first try, and I laughed because it just brought back all the weird memories. That is a weird thing about this game. There's so many places where I had a number of weird things. I got picked up by the witch at one point, flying.
Which was flying. That was a good clue actually, because it having the manual. I mean, I didn't know where it was, and this was probably my principal frustration. It's really hard to figure out a game like this when the puzzle pieces sometimes move. So, for example, the condor, which is in the manual as a friendly, once I actually saw the condor, I was like, oh, that thing's going to fly me somewhere somehow. Like, I just knew because of the way it was swooping. But when I first showed up on the screen where it appeared, like, I didn't see it at all last week. Ever. Yeah.
So, that's one of the themes I wanted to bring up is just this concept of timing and waiting. It's actually a mechanic that's important to various aspects of it, and it's just such an odd choice, because.
Yeah.
I mean, did text adventures do anything like that, where you actually had to just wait for time for some sort of timer to happen?
The only one I can think of is Deadline, which was the mystery text adventure. It's basically a cozy murder mystery where everybody's confined to a certain place and you have, I believe, 24 hours to finish the thing. So,
but you mean it's a macro timer? But like when
it was like
go ahead.
You would go to a space and then literally type wait, and a minute would go. Because all the full 24 hours or whatever are completely mapped out. And that's, it's a great text adventure. It's extremely difficult, and it works in much the same way as this game does, in that you are going to fail, and what you need to do is build up a lot of information and then play it again, and then play it again, and basically try to go, okay, you know what? Here I'm going to do a playthrough where I stay in this one room all the time, just to see what happens in this room. And then you start to make this like mental map of all the different places people are and where they were when they have these weird conversations. It's a terrific game. Don't get me wrong. It's also basically impossible. To beat.
Weird. Interesting. So that's an example. But just like you said, like coming across, and I had actually forgotten where the condor flew, so, and I also he didn't show up the first time I went to that particular screen. And so, down the road, accidentally saw him and then remembered what to do. But, it's just weird. And then, so I don't want to jump around too much, but I was going to ask a question about the witch too, because you handled it differently than I did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, so my major point about the condor, and there are other characters that are less consequential, but it's really the bird and then the witch flying around, which is hard to avoid.
I didn't have the witch fly. I didn't see the witch flying around.
It's actually just east of where the condor is, which is actually a good place to put it, because you can go to that screen and then basically flee back, and you might see the condor there and make the connection that, oh, the witch is going to pick me up. Oh, maybe the condor can also pick me up. I think the sort of geographic location of it was actually not too bad. But if you're on the screen with the witch flying, she comes down and picks you up and just flies, and then ultimately drops you to she actually drops you in the chimney, or I don't know how she gets you in the house. She drops you in the candy house, the gingerbread house, behind in the cage. And so the game's over there. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm not sure how you would get there. But it does give you this clue that, you can be picked up. Which was a good clue, but at that point I had never seen the bird when that first happened to me.
Right.
So there's just this thing where you don't know what you're not seeing, and that is very strange for an adventure game that's sort of parser based and text based and things like that. It's certainly counterintuitive to all the LucasArts adventure games as well. It's a really weird choice.
It's completely counter to the Ron Gilbert conversation, right? What was his phrasing for boiling that down? But anyway, you need to see the order of operations appropriately. Yeah. And I think kind of a similar theme to what you're saying there is just in general, the whole treasure mechanic that relates most directly to the point system, as well as what you can do with treasures. But, those are objects that you find that you would think would have some puzzle significance, and they sort of do, but they don't necessarily have to, Right. So it's like, well, I found this egg in a tree, this golden egg in a tree, and well, there's a goose that lays a golden egg in Jack and the Beanstalk. So is it related to that? But turns out,
I thought it was a dragon.
Yeah. Oh yeah. See, there you go. So it's like it's eliciting these.
I had found the dragon and didn't have the egg because I wasn't really trying to get these weird objects. It was more like, let me figure out the big puzzle pieces. And when I found the dragon, that was a super cool sequence of failures to actually find.
Yeah.
Because there's I'll just dive into it now. But you lower yourself down in the wishing well. Right. Well, I did a lot of like lowering the bucket, raising the bucket. Maybe I put something in the bucket and I tried that stuff. I was like, maybe I put me in the bucket.
That's the well. The well for me is the boiled down version that distills everything down about this game. So I'll explain after you go, but keep going.
So I lowered myself down and then I dove down there, and there's some junk at the bottom of so you can dive underwater. Yeah, and then there's some junk at the bottom, like a bottle and a can. And I'm like, well, there's got to be something. I'm like trying uncork bottle and like thinking maybe there's a letter in the bottle. Like, what are the tropes? Yeah. Right. I'm trying all this stuff. And I don't know how to do. And I was like, oh, well, try to take the bottle. I won't do that. I won't take the can. And I die. But I'm like, this is not an Easter egg. There's a reason why I'm down here. And I started exploring, and I recognized the black spots on the sides as potentially actually meant to be holes, which is a real graphics representation problem, I would say. Not the best, but because first I tried to go to the ones on, I guess, the right side of the screen. Yeah. And they're not big enough, maybe, but I couldn't get into them. And then I died before I tried the left one. So there's a lot of like test, die, repeat. It was very Edge of Tomorrow.
Yeah, they could have had bubbles coming out of that one on the left or something like that.
Something to indicate that was, I mean, it was bigger, I guess. And then I got into there, and then you can't go back. So I realized I had done something bad there, and ultimately I figured out that
you can't go back. You walk back after you deal with the dragon, right? That's what I did, at least. Oh,
okay. How did you deal with the dragon?
Well, so I threw, and I actually forgot. I remembered after the fact that you can use the water. I think you can use the water on him to douse.
That's what I did.
Oh, okay. Does that kill him?
No, it puts out the flame and it runs away from you and knocks the boulder out of the way.
Oh, okay, that's what. Okay, so I thought you could do.
So
both,
I knew you had to get that. I knew you had to get that boulder.
So what did you use the dagger for? I threw the dagger at him and it kills him.
The dagger's just a treasure.
Oh yeah, no, okay. I threw the dagger and there's actually a great graphic of him laying on the ground with the dagger sticking out of him.
Oh, nice.
And there's a little bit of color text if you try to take the dagger out of his corpse. But
now it's covered with dragon blood and you don't want it or something.
Yeah, something about being too gross. Yeah, it was interesting. But I mean, that's another interesting example of these sort of like dual, because I did get the bucket full of water. But then I forgot I could use it on him. But I already had the dagger and I remember that. So the funny thing about throwing the daggers, you have to time it, sort of.
Oh, no.
You don't actually
right, because it's moving up and down, right? The dragon.
Yeah, the dagger doesn't fly across the screen or anything, but if you throw it at the wrong time, you get a text box that comes up and says that it, flew out of reach and is gone forever, and so you're like, what?
Right.
But the thing I wanted to say about the well, which I had forgotten some of what to do with the bucket or something, and I had mixed up. I thought it had something to do in my memory with the woodcutter or something like that, because there's the water pump and I had all these red herrings that got me all mixed up. Mm-hmm. But the funny thing about that well is there's so many different things you can do around it. And so you can, which you probably discovered some of them, but of course, like you said, it's like, okay, how do I get down there? You can get in the bucket. You can lower it and climb down the rope with the bucket on it. And then you can lower it with the bucket, cut off of it if you have the dagger. Oh, that's the other thing you needed the dagger for, was the bucket.
Right, I had it.
Cut the bucket off, which is funny because you need the dagger to...
You'd need the dagger to kill the dragon if you don't cut the bucket off.
Yeah, right. So anyway, but then you can also... So then once you have the bucket, you can go around and fill the bucket in any water. And there was a moment when I was thinking, witch and bucket. Oh, maybe I have to throw the water on the witch.
That's good. Yeah, Wizard of Oz, maybe.
Yeah, I forgot about that. So, because sometimes they mix up their fairy tales on purpose. But then the other thing that I did accidentally is like, do I need the rope? So you can lower the rope down and then cut the rope. And then it just falls into the well.
and then you're done.
Never get out and down the well. But of course, you don't get a game over screen. So...
But the game is over.
But the game is over. Yeah, you can't get that.
Oh, wow, that's bad.
So it's such a weird series of things you can do with this one object. And then, of course, you can also climb down the well and get into the water and do all the dragon stuff. So I just thought it was an interesting microcosm of the weirdness of this game and kind of all the different logic and the fact that they put time into the concept of, okay, you can go and fill the bucket at any water source. In fact, I tried filling the bucket in the swamp water that I think is above the witch's house, and it gives you a different text box for filling it with gross swamp water.
Oh, nice.
But it's like you'll never use it for anything.
It wouldn't have even occurred to me actually to take the bucket away, because I basically got to the point where I had saved before I dove. Actually, the second time. So after I had died once, I had to get back to the well, and then I saved when I got to the bottom of it, and I was like, okay, there's something here, and I So at that point, getting back to the bucket and figuring that out was more like, okay,
yeah,
can I maybe put out that flame because I actually got incinerated by the dragon.
You felt like you had found the use of the bucket, and
exactly, and it didn't even occur to me to drag it around elsewhere.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe there's other uses for the water. I didn't experiment further, but it's just such a funny. And then when I was last episode, I was mentioning there's some verbs you only use once. I think dive being one of them. Mm-hmm. Although I didn't try diving in another lake.
Don't have to say more than once.
What did you? Say his name.
No, say Phil.
Oh, Phil. Right. Yeah. So Phil. So I just typed Phil.
Oh, I typed say.
You don't have
Phil.
to say. I don't think you have to say, or you have to type. Say.
Oh, okay. No, that makes sense. I just looked at it and thought when I looked at and then I started looking at all the objects as they got into my inventory, which I think is a good thing.
I was going to mention that too. It's cool that they have that representation. You're talking about the little box that comes up to show.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
it's right. But that's where you can see that it says Phil in it. And I had noticed that on stream last week.
Yeah.
But I hadn't figured it out. And it made me think of XYZZY, which is what's on the rod at the beginning of, I guess it's in Advent. It's in Advent, yes. It's famous. The XYZZY is like this magic thing you can say to this wand, and it takes you back somewhere. It teleports you.
Oh, I have no idea what you're talking about.
You. Yeah, it's an old, like, text adventure aficionados are going, oh yeah, XYZZY, of course. It's one of those things. It used to be the name of an award that they gave for IF was the XYZZY Awards. So,
funny.
So when things are marked, I'm always like, oh, that must be a thing you can say. But it took me a while. It's just like these are old muscles that have not been exercised in a long time. So a lot of these puzzles were just, oh, these are the sorts of things I used to solve. Yeah. So when I got the fill thing, I immediately knew what to do with it because it created this bowl of stew and there was the starving woodcutter. And so that was when I started actually get my crowbar into this game and to stretch these adventure game muscles again, text adventure muscles. That was the start of figuring out the whole stretch of stuff with the condor and getting dropped into the place where the mushroom was. And so as I was basically piecing together that solution. It's really funny to look at my notebook because it's like the sequence of operations and I'm like, oh, I'm going to need to do this before I do that. And sort of piecing that all together because I didn't know what I needed the fiddle for. But I'd figured out that's how I can get the fiddle from them because now they have something and you don't want to take their last thing. But if you feed them, you can take the fiddle, which is kind of weird logic. I had push rock and take dagger in there. I didn't know if that was necessary. And then finally, like after all those things, bird, and then take a mushroom and give the walnut to the rat, play the fiddle, take the shield, take the scepter. So there was a lot of just like figuring these things out and piecing a whole sequence of operations together, which is a really actually very pleasant type of play for me. It's not something I have to do very often. Yeah. But it's like stitching together a whole plan and doing things in the right order. And there's something about that I miss.
Did you
in games.
Did you have the clover with you when you went down there?
No, that was in my list of things because as soon as I saw the leprechauns, I was like, oh no, that's a thing that I know I need. Yeah. In fact, I had run out of space and it's up top in like the fold of my notebook. Get 4-leaf is the first step in my
What happens if you don't have the clover going down there? Like, because
you can't progress.
Okay, so you need the clover and the fiddle.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I didn't test that. I don't think. I didn't know to play the fiddle until I got into the next room and there were a ton of them. And then I worked that out that I needed to play the fiddle for them in the other room to make the king go, I guess is what I figured out, right? Yeah. So,
but I had played the
right.
fiddle
So
in the upper room, so I didn't see
right.
all of
No,
them.
I went in and through, and then back and played the fiddle, and then went back again, and the king got up and left or whatever.
Yeah.
So, but it wasn't really. Yeah, it is weird. I mean, that's a weird thing about text adventures is that as you encounter things, I mean, this one is weirder than most because there are multiple solutions for a lot of things. And that is, I wonder if that was a usability issue for them, that they wanted to make it a little bit easier than these sorts of games typically were and make it a little bit broader appealing. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, that's where the sort of analog nature of the score comes in, maybe. So it's like again, like I mentioned earlier, there's sort of like multiple pieces of treasure. And I think you can use the treasure, all the treasure you find in multiple different places if you want to. Like we talked about, I mean, you haven't brought up the goat yet, but you know, you can, once you lure the goat with a carrot to the troll, and that's, you know, that relates to obviously the nursery rhyme stuff, but also you can just give a treasure to the troll and he'll leave and not even deal with the goat. In fact, what I'd done my first playthrough and forgot about is I opened the gate, and if you leave and come back, the goat's just gone. I don't know where he goes, but he just escapes and leaves, and you'll never see him again. So it's like, well, in that fact, you know, I guess you could start over, but you weren't stuck because you could technically give a treasure to the troll. So there's a little bit of usability going on there, but it's just a funny, like, logic flowchart.
It's like fallbacks, basically.
Yeah.
It is. Yes, there's definitely a flowchart involved, and in fact, the map looks like a giant flowchart as well. Because there's all these just bubbles that are connected. Yeah, that's right. I sent you a picture. I had finally tidied it up, and there was still a big mistake in it, but oh well. The other thing that I thought was kind of strange is that basically not all problems are equal. There are creatures that you can totally ignore. The wolf, the ogre, and the sorcerer, I don't think you have to encounter. And also, I guess the dwarf who steals stuff. Like, you don't have to deal with them.
No, they're just kind of obstacles, I guess, along the way.
Yeah, and that's just a weird thing in an adventure game, to have obstacles that you don't have to even encounter.
Well, as a can I use that as a minor segue for one of my
topics? Absolutely.
So
please do.
So one of the things that I wrote down for the last session that kind of came back to me after finishing is just like, and I was trying to think of some of the light that I had for this game back when I played it in the 80s. And part of it was, like, I had played, you know, around the same era, some of the RPGs we've talked about, and maybe like Ultima 3 or something like that, right? And there's sense of exploration in those games, etc. But this was the first game for me, at least, with a graphical interface. And of course, text adventures do some of this, but for me, like I said earlier, I'm a very visual person. It gave me a sense of like true exploration. And I remember being blown away by that because of the world structure. And once you leave the castle, you're going in any direction, and you don't know what you're going to find on every screen, on each screen that you come upon. And sometimes there is an ogre there, and you're like, oh my God, there's an ogre there. What is the ogre doing? You know, and yes, they didn't have a puzzle purpose, but it did give it this sense of, I'm literally exploring this kingdom. And then what's more is, compared to the RPGs of the time, there isn't combat. So it literally is just walking around, you know. And
well, there's combat with the dragon.
No, but I know you know what I mean.
I know what you mean.
There's in RPG sense, you know what I mean, where it's like that's some of the bread and butter of an RPG while you're exploring. But this was more of like problem solving and exploring, right? And did you ever get the good witch's spell, the fairy godmother spell put on you? Probably, right?
I did. I just didn't know what to do with it, and it would wear off. And and actually, you could go back to her, and she would appear again. A person who wasn't always there, so sometimes you go to that screen, she wouldn't be there, and then so my assumption was, oh, that can happen once, so I have to figure out what I can run to, and get past. Right?
So that protects you from, I think, everything. But what an easy thing to do, so you don't I want to hear about
You
your
can get by
witch
the troll
experience.
that way, probably.
Oh no, actually, I don't think you can do that. But if you go when you have the spell, if you go to the witch's house, the witch will be gone because she's afraid of the spell, apparently, or something. That's just
or just randomly.
Yeah, randomly, yeah. So that's why I think maybe I wonder if that's why she's flying around. I don't know if there's a correlation to those things, but then you can go in and get the cheese and the note and stuff, and she's not even there. Apparently, I read after the fact that, and this was because I was looking at the points list because I wanted to see how to get 158 whatever it is points. I guess you can wait for her to come back and push her in the oven that way.
Right, that's what I did.
Okay, but how did you get into the? I forget how you can.
So there was a screen where she'll fly down and attack you. That is one south of the house.
Oh, so you just see if she's out.
I just see if she's out flying around and attacks me, and then I went west, north, and east. Basically, I went around her to get into the house. I'm not sure how whether that was still just random, but it worked the first time for me. So I just made the assumption that, she's out and about for some period of time. And I got into the house because I wanted to search the house to see if there's anything I needed there, or if she had like one of the treasures, because a witch had been described as having stolen the coffers, I guess, the golden coffer, which doesn't in the fairy tale version of the manual.
I don't know what that is about. Then she didn't.
Those don't map up at all. Now that I'm thinking about it, because of course the dragon protects the mirror. The dragon wasn't in the story. The coffer is held by the giant, but in the fairy tale story, it was stolen by the dwarf, I guess.
Yeah, that's all.
Yeah. No, by the witch. The witch stole it. Who stole the mirror? Anyway, yeah, they don't seem to correlate at all with
just throw you off the scent or something.
I guess I don't know. It's a very strange thing. There's no mention of leprechauns at all in the fairy tale, and there they are. So
there was no mentions of leprechauns anywhere in this book.
I'm very upset.
So another tidbit, you probably, I don't know if you saw it, but in looking at the points list afterwards, apparently you can, which I never did even back in the day, you can eat the house.
I tried.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I did after the fact. You can eat the house, and apparently that's how you find out if she's inside the house or not. Because I guess she replies to you. She didn't when I was there because she was already gone, but she says something, I guess, or comes out and you run away. And so that's how you can go to the house and check to see if she's there or not, and then come back, I guess, when she isn't. And that's sort of that's your alarm.
That's interesting. I tried to eat. I think I tried to eat the window or something like that so that I could clearly see, because you can go and look in the window. And maybe I tried to
eat the window so you could see through.
So I could see, because it was a little, it was like not transparent but translucent, and I wanted to make sure I could clearly see what was going on inside. I didn't know. I mean, this was just this was experimenting. Maybe even last week.
Great.
But
the
I was
fact
trying
that you
eating things.
Thought that you could do that. You know what I mean? Like there's enough.
Yeah.
Another little tidbit that I mentioned that I did this time, I don't remember. Like in the keyhole of must be the giant's.
The one that goes into the mountain. Yeah.
You can look inside the keyhole.
I did that too. Yeah.
Yeah. And it says something. I mean, like they thought.
I think it says you can see the big staircase or something like that.
Yeah. It's just little tidbits like that. I thought were always interesting. But again, it kind of goes back to my point of like this sense of like true exploration that I felt back then, and the fact that when you try some of these things and it actually works, and let alone like I kind of have this pretty vague memory of the first time I realized you could dive under the water in the well. And just blowing my mind, you know what I mean? Because I would drown so many times just swimming around. Like, what do I do? There's actually a little ledge that's inside the well above the water that looks like you should be able to. So, I remember back in the day seeing if I could swing the rope or something to get to that ledge. And that was just a red herring. But when you dive down below, and then there also ends up being a dragon down there, it's just, I don't know. I just have these weird, cool memories of all these things kind of put together, and then let alone getting to the giant.
I can totally see that, because, and Actually, the giant was the point at which everything was the more straightforward for me, except for climbing that darn beanstalk.
Yeah.
But,
were you high on the foliage?
Terrible. I kept falling out of that, so I did that so many times.
Did you get that joke?
Yeah, I get it now that you say it that way. But
yeah. Those
you better watch yourself when you're high on the foliage. Yeah. That's that Ken Williams, the hot tub man. No, what was I going to say? Now I lost it because I'm high on foliage. No, it was before that.
Straight shot from the giant. Once you got to the giant, you said it was. I had gotten the right. Yeah, actually, I found it pretty easy. For one thing, I was indestructible at that point because I had the shield, and he'll try to punch you and nothing happens. And I'm like, oh well, that's good. But I didn't know how to take him down, and I actually just happened to find the sling not too long after that. I actually had a hard time. I fought with the parser a lot of like what to do, like use sling on giant, use stone in sling, I tried all these different formulations and it was just use sling. I was like, that was easy. Right, but my original. So you had the pebbles then already, then you're saying?
Yeah. I had picked them up.
Yeah, that's a pretty.
I didn't know what they were for, but I had seen them last week. Streaming, and I just knew that I wanted to pick them up. So I went and picked them because I knew they were going to be for something. I thought maybe the other thing I thought about was maybe you were going to need to use the bowl with the pebbles to feed the wolf, because that's a thing, like filling the wolf's belly with stones. I feel like that's a fairy tale thing. I don't remember which
Red
one.
Riding Hood, I think, right? No,
I think that it might be that one.
Oh, maybe
there's definitely there's definitely a fairy tale where you fill the wolf's belly with stones. It might be. I really can't remember. But,
no, you're right. There is one.
It's the wolf and the 7 young goats. I've just looked it up. So it's another goat one, and then they get the goats out after the wolf is full of the stones or something. I don't even remember how that one works.
To weigh him down so they can catch him or something.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, that's a weird one. Oh, to make it think he still has a full belly from eating the goats, but yeah, it's a weird one. That's one of the weird sick fairy tales where you're like, what? Yeah. You cut open the belly of the wolf to get your children out, and then you put stones in and sew it back up. Yeah, fairy tales are weird.
And this game,
good name for them to be grim,
continues that tradition. That's weirdness.
Yeah.
It was cool because depending on what order you get some of the, I don't know if the mirror does anything for you, but when you get the shield, because the creatures down below that you mentioned also can't harm you if you have the shield. So you're kind of
the dragon can,
but the ones roaming around, like the ogre or something.
Right. The ogre. Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that. At that point, I was just avoiding all that stuff because it seemed like there was no.
Yeah, no, I had accidentally gone back to one of those screens and had luckily found that. But and then with the giant, which I again read in the point list. Apparently, there's a way to wait for the giant to go to sleep. And then you can you get points for that, and you can get the chest that way.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but again, that's sort of another one of those waiting mechanics where it's like, how would you even think to do that?
Well, I mean,
unless you happen upon.
I think that's though part of the Jack and the Beanstalk myth, or story, is that he basically waits till the giant falls asleep to steal whatever that treasure is, and then the giant falls down the beanstalk. So I
think you're right.
Like I did many times. That actually that was the worst moving mechanic in the game.
So I also read after the fact on that page where the points list was that apparently the trick, which I had already finished it, so I didn't get to utilize this trick, but apparently the trick with the beanstalk is as long as your feet are touching the part of the main beanstalk, then you won't fall.
Okay.
Which is completely counterintuitive and weird because it means basically your hands can be in midair in some places. But that was the rule.
I basically just made progress and saved.
Oh, me too.
Made progress and saved.
Exactly.
And then just tried to like memorize the next 4 key presses. Like, oh, okay, I'll go this way. But the feet, oh, that's terrible. Yeah, some of that stuff is not. Yeah, is obviously not great. I mean, it's a limitation of the time for sure. It is weird that there's these. It's a weird. I mean, they're basically throwing a lot of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And I'm kind of curious. Is Space Quest the same year? Is it a year later? It's probably a year later, right?
I don't remember. I think we found out it is a year later. Yeah, but they're developing clearly around the same time. But I can't wait to get back to that game because my memory of the world structure is very different. But I could be wrong. But I don't think it's. I have a feeling that actually King's Quest, this particular King's Quest, might be one of the only ones that had a structure like this. But
the fully connected world and all that stuff.
Yeah, and I think because of that, it kind of it not only complicates things in a weird way, but I think it leads you astray in some weird ways. You know, like with the LucasArts games, it was more of like these closed networks of problems to solve before moving on to the next area or something like that. Right. You know.
Yeah, you basically come up against some wall, and you have to figure out how to get past that wall. And there's not, and basically you're between 2 walls at that point. You've passed through something that you can't go back to, and now you're in a space that is, it's enclosed. It's 6 screens or whatever, and you can't progress until you figure out the puzzle. Day of the
Tentacle. Are you talking about Space Quest?
No, I mean LucasArts. Day of the Tentacle.
There's kind of
sort of an exception, but mostly just because it was across the 3 time periods. Yeah,
but like this, the just not the linear nature, but the concept that's. So I don't remember for sure, but I my vague memory is that Space Quest might be a little bit more traditional like that. That's why I wanted to bring up the sense of kind of just pure exploration, because it was so novel to me at the time. And that was different. Space Quest has a different kind of exploration that I'm sure we'll talk about, but this
definitely this reminds me more of the Advent and Zork type text adventures, because those are not. It's possible always to go back. In fact, you have to, in order to get the points in those games, you have to return the various objects to the trophy chest and things like that. So, or the trophy. I don't call it a trophy chest, but whatever, the trophy cabinet in the White House at the beginning of the game. So you have to actually literally get back to the beginning of the game. And there's different ways to get there. You can kind of backtrack, or there is a way to go back up through the trapdoor in that room if you can find the corresponding place underground to do that. So it had that familiarity. Here they kind of, I feel like they were here throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall to see what sticks. As they try to expand their sort of repertoire and maybe also prove out the new capabilities of this system and things like that, as we talked about this week. But doing that at that point, it'll be really interesting to see what they took from this experiment, this sort of experimental game, and then carried forward to another property. So the fact that the map structure will change is interesting. It probably makes sense in the sort of game that they're making with that. But I'm curious. I find myself now really eager to dive into Space Quest and see what have they learned, and what have they abandoned? What have they decided was no good? Especially some of these structural things that we've talked about, like, well, these things you can skip, etc. So totally. Yeah, there's
different designers on it. The 2 guys from Andromeda, I forget their real names. I just know them as a child. They're sort of weird idols of some kind. There's the interesting.
Mark Crow and Scott Murphy.
Yeah, right. That's right. Those names ring a bell. They were, I think, thanks for this game, but I'm sure they're all working together on stuff. But anyway, what I was going to say without spoiling too much is the interesting thing, or at least my memory of Space Quest compared to this game, is because it's not as open network of a world structure like this is. what I remember is those walls you were talking about, right? Or those doors that kind of come to a bottleneck that you have to get through. They ended up being much bigger show blockers for me, right? Showstoppers rather. So meaning you could literally do nothing else until you figure out the next puzzle. Mm-hmm. Here, at least you could kind of like, I'm not sure what to do with the dragon yet, but I'll try to go do this other thing. Maybe I'll figure the giant out, or you know what I mean? So you kind of had some options to kind of unstick your brain as you get that kind of adventure game puzzle, brain block. And my memory of Space Quest is like, you'll get to a point in some places where it's like, no, you just got to figure out what to do here. And if you don't, you're going to be stuck for, and that happened.
As long as it takes to solve that puzzle. Yeah. It's actually one of the things
more demoralizing.
Right. Sure. It's one of the things that I think makes these sorts of games fun to play with another person.
That's true.
In my case, I played Advent with my dad over the blazingly fast 200 baud modem that I've mentioned before, to connect to his work supercomputer, really, at the time. Wow. And
you're old.
I am. But I mean, it makes it fun to both have your own picking up on clues in different ways, just because different people's brains work in different ways, and you pick up on different things out of the text versus just knowledge that you have, and what have you. And it does make this sort of game kind of fun. It's really kind of the appeal of ARGs as well, to sort of take a modern, sort of weird extension of the adventure game, where you're taking literally masses of people to solve problems, because nobody's going to know all the specific data that you need to know, and they're very gating as well. So in terms of like, you have to solve this step before you can go on to the next step.
Yeah, I haven't done it in a while, and I haven't played an ARG in a while, but that's something that Reed and I would do a lot. He's usually the one figuring most of it out, but we would play something together, and over long distance, and it is much more fun. And to your point about your story about your dad, Space Quest was that game for me too, because we had both gotten into Sierra games at the same time, and my memory is Space Quest actually broke him too. It was one of the first ones we played, but because we got stuck so many times, he was just like, this isn't
fun. Why would anybody devote their life to a career in this garbage?
Yeah. Oh, the irony. So I can't wait to play that one. Another quick tidbit I wanted to mention before I forget is you can give the carrots. You can get multiple carrots and then you can give them to the woodcutter. I didn't try eating a carrot. I should have tried that, because it's like, well, the woodcutter needs food, and then he happily takes the carrot and I guess eats it or something.
And you don't you can't get a fiddle at that.
You can't get the fiddle from it. It's not enough food, apparently.
Right. Well, it's good for his eyesight, and he would be but see you stealing his fiddle, I guess. I actually had done multiple carrots, but only because I went and brought one to the goat and offered it to the goat, like gave goat, and he ate it, and I was like, now I have to go back. Though I remembered to close the gate, so I think that's awesome that he left it open and it wandered away. That's great. Yeah, it's really it's such an interesting mix of stuff because there's a lot of things that you're like, oh yeah, naively this makes a certain amount of sense if you don't know, because it's like, oh well, let's make the world as realistic as we can given the scenario that they're in, and and part of that is like, oh well, let's design these enemies that you need to avoid in these arcadey ways, and I mean, it's just like there's a certain amount of top downness again, that this is sort of a thing that we've talked about before, of like the top goal is, let's make a realistic seeming kingdom, and well, what would that feel like? And like, oh, things have their own agendas and move around and aren't always in a place. So some of the mistakes, I think, are motivated from that top-down goal that they just didn't probably have the time or really just vision to see, oh, but that's really a problem because, right? Because even at this time, it wasn't like there was millions of RPGs and things like that, and these problems might have been in RPGs even at the time. Although I don't think so much, but certainly possible that they would have had random encounter tables and things like that. So some of that, you would have problems like that as well. So I don't know. Interesting. This is about the oldest game we've played.
Probably.
Also, yeah, it might be. Might be.
Some of the Mario World was later.
Say Super Metroid is 86, right?
Oh yeah, maybe so. Yeah.
No, way later, 94. No, it's the original Metroid that I was actually thinking of was earlier because I played that one as well.
Yeah. Well, and whether directly or not, I just feel like, as you were saying, they're throwing stuff at the wall, and there's kind of a combination of things that are put in here being influenced by some of the text adventures and other things. For me, at least, I've always seen some weird, influences and parallels to what this game was doing in games after it. You know what I mean? Like it was enough of an influence on the industry. And I actually looked back at the box, because I still have the box for this game, ironically.
Oh my goodness.
And there's a little side flag on it that's like 500 copies sold, 500,000 copies sold. And in that day and age, 500,000 copies is
a lot.
Amazing. So it left a crater, right. and it basically put Sierra on the map, I'd say. So, and like I said, I was in from nostalgia's perspective, just was a fan after playing this. I played all of their stuff. I couldn't wait for the next thing to come out. And for the most part, they had a pretty good track record, overall. There were definitely some stinkers here and there, but, Quest for Glory was another series that was pretty good. There was kind of this weird mix-up, mashup of King's Quest and an RPG where you had classes and very interesting stuff. Manhunter, Betrayal at Krondor they did, which was, I think, a book adaptation.
I didn't realize that was them. I guess I had forgotten that, yeah.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. But then we already talked about Police Quest, Space Quest, Leisure Suit Larry. So it was just a weird, crazy, catalog and company, I'd say.
Yeah. Well, let's keep rolling and dive right into the email so we can kind of tie it up in one segment. We only have the one, so we might as well just dive in. Okay. Before we do that, of course, I want to remind people they can send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. We love every letter we receive, and we like to read them on air and answer your questions. We have one that was extremely long and a bit edited down. And there, I guess we'll talk about it when we get to the cut. But you go ahead. I sent it over to you.
Yeah. Okay. So this is from Blarg42. That rings a bell. Have we heard from Blarg before? Maybe not.
No, I don't think so. I think you're probably just keying off the 42 and the sound that you make when you gargle.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Those two things in the forefront of my mind always. Blarg42. The subject is DGC and MGS fanboy in overly excited too long rant. Uh-oh. Greetings to you, Brett and Tim. And before you ask...
Mostly the rant is what I cut out. So.
Oh, okay. I know this is not my real name, but as I'm from Iceland, I'll spare you the torture of trying to pronounce it. You probably press the select button immediately. It's okay. First of all, I'd like to say thank you for your wonderful podcast. Like many others, I started listening to your Final Fantasy IX series, one of my favorite JRPGs, and have since then tried my best to go back and listen to all of the episodes in order. This was going fine until I noticed your recent episodes on MGS1, which is probably my favorite game of all time, so I couldn't resist the opportunity to jump ahead to listen to your own thoughts on it and give you some of my own thoughts, questions, while it's hopefully still fresh in your minds. After my questions, I've also included a sort of gift to you, in quotes, at the end, a collection of secrets, odd things, and tricks in the game, which you may or may not have known about. No need to read it out loud in the cast unless you really want to, of course. Okay, and then you cut a section out.
So let me go with and just sort of describe. There was a lot of discussion in the paragraph about the different female characters, because one of the things we touched on was the sort of sexism of the game and how it treated its female characters. I won't say that there's no. I mean, there's definitely an argument to be made that there are some strong characters and female characters. No argument that there are, and in the series as a whole, it's just the things that were gross, and we were just calling out those. So I don't. I'm not the sort of person who says, "Well, here's a cookie. You weren't always gross." I mean, without going into, I mean, there's a lot in his sort of description, and I don't want to boil it down to that, but that's really what it comes down to for me is just, yes, but you were often gross. Yes, there's other stuff that's good, but you are often sometimes quite terrible. So
you gotta be consistent. Yeah. I mean, as Brett and I were talking about it, like one small additional thing I'll add in there is I think he does have strong female characters in the games, and I think there's some good messages. And as I think I probably mentioned throughout the series, that the boss in Metal Gear 3 is one of my favorite characters of all time, and I think she's amazing. But it's usually the things around the characters that diminish the impact of that characterization. The way that other characters relate to the characters, the way that the character design sometimes feminizes them, and all of those sorts of things. So it's
right.
I think the choices are there.
Yeah, when you're aspiring to be Solid Snake, he's the hero character, and then he's being gross.
Yeah,
you are also sort of implicitly saying aspire to be gross, right? And that's kind of stuff that we object to. Anyway, so
let's
continue with the other part, which is the part with the questions.
Okay, my question is regarding how MGS blends actual facts and history with its fictional near future tech. Well, 2005, so near past now. And supplemental elements. Obviously, it doesn't try to be very faithful to reality, but still has a lot to say about real-world events, politics, technology, and even ethics. And for my early teen self, it introduced me to many concepts and ideas such as nuclear deterrence, the Manhattan Project, nuclear waste, DARPA, cloning, and the science of genes when I played it the first time. Of course, it took me a while to separate some of the facts from the fiction as I grew older and learned more about these subjects, but without the influence of MGS, I might have never even gained an interest in them to begin with. So I wanted to ask, what is your opinion on games that either take inspiration from or directly comment on real events or concepts in the way MGS does? Or BioShock, with its moral questions on science, politics, for example. Would you like to see more or perhaps fewer such games? And have you ever wanted to make a game that touches on non-fictional elements yourselves? Yeah, that's cool. I mean, before we answer the real question, I definitely want to agree with him on MGS's side of that. Not that I learned completely new things about it, but it definitely, I probably talked about this on the series, but it definitely was one of my, it's one of the things I love about the franchise. It's just nonfiction enough for me to want it all to be real.
Right. It throws in all that Tom Clancy stuff. Yeah. No doubt. I mean, the other game that came to mind that wasn't listed was Far Cry 2 for me. That kind of
that's a good example.
Being based in sort of an African conflict, maybe over blood diamonds or who knows what, but basically war-torn country, in Africa is the sort of background of that story, and involves a lot of its sort of storylines revolve around that conflict and gun running and things like that. And of course, you're like what are you?
In Far Cry.
You're a merc, right? Yeah. I mean, in Far Cry 2. So And it's really all about all of the horrible things that go into all of that, and so I love that game for that. I mean, I'm huge on nonfiction stuff making its way into games. I think that to a certain degree, often that's that's what drives certain types of creators. Obviously, Kojima is really very concerned with real world stuff, and his own fears maybe drive what goes into his games, or maybe his fears that he felt when he was younger. So that's definitely, I think, a great way to draw on your own past for games. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm blanking on more game examples. I do feel like they're out there, though, of ones that I really appreciated about it. BioShock, Far Cry. And I do like them as well. Like I really, I'm really bummed I can't think of some example because they're kind of on the tip of my tongue, but I really appreciate them. And to his final question, I mean, having wanted to make some of the, some nonfiction elements in games myself, I definitely want to. Like I think this medium is so powerful for being able to explain an idea or and I think some of the indie games are really, tackling this now because they're able to, right? And I think one of the, like, if not to pick on any particular franchise and, in my current position, I want to be careful about that stuff, but, some of the common modern day and World War II shooters, I think one of my issues with them is they often try to take a serious tone with a pretty serious topic and then don't quite land. It doesn't quite land, so I tend to kind of shy away from those. But if you look at something like This War of Mine, which is directly hitting, relationships in a wartime, war-torn country and just doing things in a much more, I guess I'll say, elegant way. And they're definitely what's the crossing the border, Papers, Please, right? Papers, Please, yeah. I think is another good example where you don't need the fidelity to kind of carry a message across. So I'm just excited that indie games are really taking the mantle of this stuff forward. And I do wish, the truth of the matter is, I think it's really hard for big publishers to stomach going too deep, and that's why I think it's amazing that Kojima's gotten to talk about this stuff as long as he has, because no one in their right mind would allow it, to be honest. And it's really hard to kind of get that stuff to creep in, because generally people, publishers see this stuff as entertainment, and they don't think people want some of those more nonfiction interesting topics. But I think they do. I do.
Yeah, I think there's always been another one I thought of was Cart Life, which is I don't know if you've ever played it, but
no, I haven't played that.
Which involves a lot of sort of mini mechanics around like the things you would actually have to do to own a small cart, basically, that sells like a newspaper kiosk, and like all the hard decisions that come from not having enough memory and or not enough money rather, but also having to remember things and like remember to do things in a certain order, or else you lose some of your inventory. And then another World War I movie, World War I game that I thought of was Valiant Hearts, which is sort of an adventure game. I think that's Ubisoft, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
and
one of their internal small studios.
And since I'm not with a big AAA publisher, I will say, like, it's disappointing to have things like Far Cry 5 rather come out, which is in the news right now, and have the reviews basically say, they have this huge sort of cult background in the United States, and they basically don't use it to say anything, and it's just kind of sad. It's kind of it's such a missed opportunity, because I'm sure that the people who made the game have a sort of perspective on that, and to just treat it as a playground seems kind of I don't know, just like a missed opportunity. I mean, I don't really want to push it much further than that. But there's lots of games that have real world elements. When I talked to Sean Vanneman and Jake Rodkin about Firewatch several years back, they were basing that on a real world event, a fire in Wyoming in the 80s, and the fact of fire watchtowers. And there was a good memoir that we read about a guy who spent his summer in one. So, yeah, there's tons of stuff in games that can be in the real world and explore issues in the real world. It shouldn't be everything we do, but I think that makes it more approachable for a lot of players. I mean, Gone Home's another one, obviously.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I just thought of two kind of in a weird way, and I actually haven't played it. I've just listened to people on podcasts talk about it, but it seems like the new Wolfenstein, not necessarily nonfiction per se, but it tries to, tackle a what if in a weird way with sort of the German occupation in the US and stuff. So I don't know, there's some clever things being done out there. The one, to play devil's advocate, which is not an opinion I hold, but I definitely have heard the sentiment sometimes of, and I don't know if this is, say, for instance, what maybe Far Cry 5 ran into, but there is sort of this, people definitely don't always want to be talked to about serious subjects like that when they're playing their entertainment, So that argument comes up a lot, and I definitely respect it and understand it, even though it's not my own. But it's like sort of like, well, don't preach at me. I'm playing a game,
Right.
So,
yeah, no, I mean, I get that. I mean, I can certainly, it's also not a thing that I share. I mean, there's plenty of games that are that. Like, it's often that when you see a game that is tackling a subject you haven't seen before, you're like, oh, I hope they tackle this in an interesting way.
Totally.
If you come from that perspective, and then it's just kind of like, oh, they didn't. And then of course, the final thing I wanted to mention was, of course, although for us, the history that we worked in is really a long, long time ago. And really in a galaxy far, far away. We did, of course, work with historical references in our Star Wars games.
Wow. That was well placed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. And then I just wanted to read. So he did give us some of those bits, some great. So there's a ton of them. So I'm not going to read them all, but a few secrets and things that I thought were particularly good. One was, in the hallway before the Ocelot battle, there's a wall you can blast with C4 to the right, which contains a camera. You can use it to take pictures and save them to the memory card. Taking pictures of certain things, such as defeated bosses, posters on the wall, and other random objects, will reveal ghost images of the developers of the game, including Kojima, Yoji Shinkawa, and many others. I thought that was really cool. Yeah.
I didn't know about that one. I found the camera before, but I didn't know what really you needed to do with it.
Yeah, I didn't. That's something I didn't know at all. This is one that I kind of alluded to and hadn't figured out entirely. But the cardboard boxes, if you use them in a in a truck, it will take you to the places that's written on the box, which was the thing I was trying to figure out what you could do with it, but I knew there was something that they would like recognize and stuff like that.
That's hilarious. Yeah. And
then here's one that I thought was pretty funny. And there are another dozen. There's a ton of these that he sent in. I love it. Thanks for sending those all in. They're entertaining to read. But he says, during the Hind D liquid battle, call Campbell on the codec and he will tell you to listen to the sound of the rotor blades to find out where the chopper is coming from. If, however, you chose mono sound in the audio settings, him and others in the team will be surprised that you don't have a stereo TV. Definitely one of the funnier codec calls. And there's a YouTube link that I'll put in the show notes. It's very funny because they're like, oh, you're not a terrible person because you don't have a stereo TV. I mean, there are more important things in life, and it's pretty great. They're all just like, what? He doesn't have a stereo TV? Really
that's
funny.
Amazing. I didn't know that one. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's a pretty good one because, of course, at many points in the game, you can ask for help basically by calling on your codec when you're in these boss battles. And that's a pretty good one. But thanks for all that, Blarg42. We appreciate the email.
Yeah, that's great.
Why don't you set us up for next time? Because I've never played Space Quest, now I've played King's Quest, but I hadn't. I don't know how to measure how much to play.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know if my memory's good enough to say.
I probably go some number of hours. Basically, is what's going to probably happen.
Yeah, I don't. As far as numbers of hours, I think it's probably around the same. So I mean, I think try to play. You know what? I'll do a little research. But just try to play for a couple hours. I think for that first one. Now, like I said, I believe the structure. Like, I'll give you
more gated. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, with an example being, it's Space Quest. So you
gotta get in your spaceship and go quest.
You gotta go into space, right? Or you go to say another planet, and then how do you get off that planet? So my memory is, I would say, get off planet and then get off the second planet, kind of thing. But I don't know if that's enough time. You start. Yeah, I don't want to spoil things, but it's a funny game. But I'll do a little research on sort of the quote unquote chapters and see if there's a natural stopping point. But play for a couple hours. Yeah,
keep an eye out. I will put that out on the Dev Game Club Twitter at Dev Game Club. If I hear from Tim on that in the next few days. Otherwise, I'll just be doing a few hours myself, and then next week we'll be burning through it to try to finish it. But I look forward to it. I look forward to playing that one as well. This one has kind of whet my appetite. Find myself kind of, that's right. This is an itch I used to scratch regularly. I forgot I had this itch at one time. So it's been really fun to revisit this sort of thing.
And one interesting, not only world structure probably changed, but one other interesting aspect of the Space Quest games is they try to lean into humor a lot more. Like the two guys from Andromeda, are armchair comedians. They think, and so there's kind of a Day of the Tentacle kind of tongue in cheek kind of fun day play. That's my memory at least. So
cool. I look forward to it. In the meantime, you can find the podcast on Twitter at Dev Game Club. As I mentioned, you can find me at Brett_Duville and him at
Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
You can find us on the web at devgameclub.com. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, you can shoot us email at devgameclub@gmail.com. Thanks so much for playing along, and good night.
Good night.